Hello everyone, welcome to Queerly Recommended, the podcast where we recommend queer films, books, TV shows, and more. I'm Tara Scott, and I review queer women's fiction at the Lesbian Review and Smart Bitches Trashy Books. I'm usually joined by Chris Bryant, incredible lesbic author, but this week, neither of us is actually recommending anything because we have something special for you. A few months ago, I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing Jonathan Van Ness, one of the stars of Queer Eye and the web series Game of Thrones, for a live event. And thanks to a moment of vulnerability on my part, which you're actually going to hear in this episode, he gave me permission to post the conversation on the podcast. And so I am just thrilled to be able to share this with all of you. I still kind of can't believe that it happened, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. One last thing before we move on to the conversation, though. This week, if you enjoy the episode, please don't send any money to us through coffee. Instead, Chris and I would like you to make a donation to the Transgender Education Network of Texas, and there's a link in the show notes to their site so you can learn more about them and donate. JVN mentions them during the conversation, and it's just an incredible organization doing crucial work for trans people in the state of Texas. Now, on to my conversation with Jonathan Van Ness. I am so excited to be hosting this chat with Jonathan today. And what a happy coincidence that we're having at the beginning of Pride Month. Woo! Right? Yes. Go, my fellow queerdos. So whether you're joining us in person or online, please feel free to send your questions in either through the platform or the conference app, and we will get to as many as we can. Jonathan Van Ness is a New York Times best-selling author, podcaster, comedian, hairstylist to the stars, has a clean and sustainable hairline called JVN, and is probably, let's be honest, best known as one of the stars of the Queer Eye reboot on Netflix. His Netflix series and popular podcast, both called Getting Curious, are an absolute must if you're a curious person who loves to learn about diverse topics. And in April of this year, Jonathan's second book was released called Love That Story, Observations from a Gorgeously Queer Life. I've already listened to it and get it in audio. That's just my own personal recommendation. Welcome, Jonathan. I don't know if they can see it. Show them your shoes.
Oh,
how beautiful.
The shoe.
Right?
Not to be like that person, but it's an Alaya. It is. The shoe is.
Okay.
Like from Clueless, remember?
Oh my. Okay. Okay. Here's the thing. I feel like I could talk about your look all day because you're so beautiful. But I don't think that's what any of these people showed up here for.
Are you sure?
So actually, Jonathan, so you started your career as a hairstylist, of course, and then you became internet famous with the fabulous web series Game of Thrones, so fun.
Yes.
And then you became Netflix famous when you joined the Fab Five on Queer Eye. So you've really gone on this huge journey of becoming a public figure. So how have you found ways to stay true to yourself?
Well, it's sometimes it's a really good question. I feel like I don't really have a choice. Like, I have always been this way, so I don't really know how to not be super true to myself.
Right.
I do think that it's been interesting because, after Game of Thrones for the longest time, I was like, I want to keep doing this. I want to be in front of the camera. I always thought I was meant to be behind the camera as a hairdresser. Shh, Apple Watch. I just became an Apple Watch person, you guys. I never thought it would be my truth, but I am so obsessed. I literally all the time I'm like, anyway, I haven't learned how to silence it yet though, so I'm so sorry about that. But yeah, so it's after Game of Thrones, I really just fell in love with writing, producing, storytelling. Didn't necessarily know if I would get to keep doing it, and then Queer Eye happened. But it's so much different than I kind of thought it would be. There's so much more, and it's better in certain ways than I thought it would be. It's more pressure in certain ways than I thought it would be. So it's definitely it reminds me of this thing that my stepdad always said, which is no matter where you go, there you are. Mm-hmm. And while I don't have to worry necessarily about how I'm gonna pay my rent, which is what used to be one of my top 2 concerns every month, there's I feel like in other ways I have kind of the weight of the world on my shoulders because I know so many more people, I see so many more people, I'm like aware of my impact and I'm aware of the platform and I want to help. I mean, ultimately I think I'm someone who wants to help people. And so, yeah, it's been interesting. It's been just, wow, life, who knew?
So, the way you talk about your platform, so I've already recommended to everybody in the audience, get your latest book in audio. But you talk in that book about how the way you give, like giving back isn't always the same for everyone. And I mean, that's something that we talk about at Benevity anyway. Like some people give, some people volunteer. And for you, you choose to be vulnerable with your voice and your platform. And as you say, you kind of have a bigger platform than most people, but what would you say to other people that maybe they don't have the same platform, but they want to use their voice too? How can they do that?
Yeah, I think, well, one way that I think sometimes that we don't talk about a lot is like the ways that like, I'm just obsessed with duality right now, you guys. Like 2022, I'm obsessed with duality, like how two separate truths can be coexisting at the same time. And so while you'll see the public-facing things that I might advocate for, and one thing that I wrote a lot about and love that story, my last book, is about my relationship with my dad. And he just came to my house for the first time. I've never had my own house that he came to, and so he came with my stepmom a few weeks ago. And I just did this amazing episode of Getting Curious, not to toot my own horn, but with this historian who, she's a historian.
Wait, is it the Jen Mannion episode?
No, it hasn't come out yet, but that episode is also major.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's so good. We just, honestly, lately, we've just been doing it. Yeah. But I got to interview this historian in reproductive law. So she is a historian in American reproductive law, which is such an intersectional field, and it turns out people have been seeking reproductive health care for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So interesting. But so I explained this whole thing to my dad, and I kept checking in, and this is post the book. And he said to me at the end, I get chills thinking about it. He said, I've never thought of it like that. Which I was like, did you just have another mini stroke? Are you okay? Because he's never said something like that. And so it's the things that we do privately, right? So it's I don't and obviously I wrote a chapter in my book about it, and I just told this gigantic, gorgeous room of people about that. But it's not something I'm really putting on my feed about the way that I use my voice in private with people who I'm close with in my life. And those voices are so important. Our friends and our family are so important. So you don't have to advocate or use your voice on Instagram or on TikTok or on whatever. You can do it person to person in your life. And that's part of why I use he, she, they pronouns. And it's why I think it's really important, because that's a small way that I can take the conversation around the gender binary into everyday life and take those conversations with me into spaces where it's uncomfortable for people and where maybe they're gonna have a reaction to that, but then I can talk about that. So I think it's how can you do things, how can you take things that you're passionate about into spaces and talk about them where you're not quite sure how it's gonna go over. Obviously keeping yourself safe.
Yes.
But I think what we really do need at this point is more cishet people to talk about the violence against trans people, because right now it's we see a lot of anti-trans legislation. There's just a lot of stuff against trans people right now. And I think what's alarming me for my cisgender siblings out there is that it's you too already. The same misogynistic energy and the same conservative colonial energy that is legislating these anti-trans bills, they're gonna come for how women dress next. They're gonna come for how, and they already are. They already are literally policing how children dress in multiple states in the United States. So this is everyone's fight. It's the same toxic masculinity that causes men to be violent and doesn't know how to talk about their feelings. It's the same toxic misogyny that tells women that they can't pursue whatever they wanna pursue professionally or in their personal life. So these colonial gender binaries, it's not just trans kids and trans people who are being harmed by this violence, it's everyone. And I feel we're losing sight of that. This isn't some random marginalized plight that we're asking for cishet people's allyship on. It's this is your fight too.
Yeah. Right? Yes. So, we talked a little bit about this on Zoom. I think my dad is a little like your dad, and also it's been kind of a journey. And it takes a long time. Like, how long did it take for you to get to that point with your dad? How many years were you having these conversations?
22 minus 8.
Right.
So ever since 2007, really, I mean, always kind of a little bit around DOMA and stuff, growing up. But when I really was it's probably 2007 to now.
So these conversations are hard to have, absolutely, whether it's with family or colleagues.
I kind of love them.
Okay, so let me reframe that. These conversations can be hard.
Yes.
For other people. So what?
Those people, oh yeah.
Right, those people.
It's about other people right now.
Just like us basics. But what would you say to people that want to speak up on these really difficult issues? Because, maybe it is about anti-trans legislation, maybe it's about white supremacy, maybe it's about, the climate disaster that we're all living in. What would you say to people who are trying to figure out how to start that journey of speaking up and having the tough conversations, and how can they do it in a way also that maintains relationship, but also preserving those personal boundaries and personal safety?
Well, personal safety is its own kind of thing. And because there's so many people in the world and there's so many conversations that you could have, it's hard for me to prescribe that. But I do think that when you see it, you have to talk about, you don't have to, but that's how I kind of see it. When I see it, I talk about it, in real life. So if I'm working and someone says something randomly low-key transphobic, or there's a missed pronoun, or there's I just talk about it. And then if there's pushback or oh, someone's sensitive, it's no, I'm not sensitive. That's actually a form of violence, and let's talk about it. So it's it's just being able to talk about something when something arises, not letting something pass. I think that's one way that you can start to do it. And I think that it's also people in your life. I'm really curious right now if even engaging with people on the internet matters or
are they
works.
Actually people even, or are they just literal bots or trolls?
Right, because it literally could be a literal robot. But seriously,
no,
that's
for real.
That's a thing. So it's how can you have these conversations where you can move? I think volunteering has never been more important. There's so many organizations on the ground. There's so many mutual aid organizations that really need time, really need support, and that's a way for you to get on the front lines and make a difference in the world. Not that you can't make a difference on the world online, because that is possible too. There's always a way. But I think that if you're nervous and you want to do something that's really effectual, community is really helpful. Seeing how other people show up and how other people or of service in their community can give you a roadmap. So I think that's a really good way to start to show up, is volunteering for someone who you are really passionate about, or for a cause that you're really passionate about.
Yes, love that. I think this is the kind of audience that would love that too.
Oh, yay. Have you done this before? You're such a good moderator. Right?
Did somebody pay you to say that?
It was the way you were just getting tens across the board for me. Not that anyone asked, but you were just yes, I feel I'm in good hands right now.
Okay. I wasn't going to tell you this. I told some friends that. Okay, so I have been. I've had queer podcasts for many years now, and I have never been on the main stage of Goodness Matters before, and I was a little nervous. I've been on a public speaking journey, and so I told myself this is my super secret podcast episode, which of course is not going on my podcast feed, but that's my.
You should see if they'll let you rip the audio. Put it as a bonus episode.
Could you imagine? Okay. No, for real, let's get back.
Verbal offers are pining in California.
That's right. Okay, let's get back to actual questions though, but thank you.
Yeah, my bad.
I love this, thank you. You just gave me all my life, and my kids are gonna be so proud of me.
Oh, they already were, but that was cute.
That's right.
So, I mean, one of the things you're just really known for is your authenticity, but also embracing the like you have to embrace the vulnerability. If you're going to be authentic, you have to, you can't do it otherwise. So what did your journey to living authentically look like? And did anything inspire you from, perhaps a state of being afraid to just like being you, that's it?
I've had so many incredible teachers in my life and people who I've looked up to. One person that immediately jumps up into mind anytime I say the word vulnerability, I always think of Brene Brown, like right away.
Yes.
And I mean, her work, I had a therapist that like when I was really in some of my darkest, like hardest times, who got me onto her vulnerability TED Talk, which like changed my life. And yeah, so I mean Margaret Cho is another person who comes to mind, who like the universe, like I've loved her since I was 14. Like I loved Notorious CHO. It's like one of the strongest like stand-up specials of all time.
Iconic.
She is just genius. And then we got to work together on Game of Thrones. And then in 2014, she literally looked at me in the face and was like, "You're meant to be a stand-up comedian." And I was like, "I'm meant to be your hairdresser." Like, I don't know about that, and I would just love to do your hair if you're open, and like, but she kind of like was gently like nudging me towards things that like she saw that I could do that I didn't even know that I could do.
Yes.
And she kind of like has just been such a cheerleader, like privately and publicly, and someone that I can talk to, and her team as well. Like I just love her. Yeah, there's so many more, but.
Wonderful. So, would you say, like, thinking about self-acceptance, because I mean, you also can't really be authentic unless you're able to accept who you really are, because otherwise you're just gonna be in an argument with yourself all the time. What would you say that opens doors to? Like, is there belonging? Is it opportunities? What have you found comes from self-acceptance?
So, as a non-binary person, I am, you know what I'm really like coming for in 2022, everyone? Like, I'm really like, it's like false dichotomies and like false absolute choices.
Yes.
And your question was genius, but I would challenge the question, which was, if you don't accept it, you can't be authentic if you don't accept yourself. And I think that's a false dichotomy. I think that is not a black and white 0% thing. I think that there is so many layers to the human experience and so many layers to who we are as humans. There can absolutely be parts of yourself that you aren't quite sure how you feel about, or maybe you're not quite sure, or you haven't quite processed it yet, but that doesn't mean that you don't accept yourself. Like, you can accept that you don't accept yourself.
Yeah, agree.
So if you're in a place of being like, really depressed, like really not in a place of acceptance, like when I think about like my 2012, which is a lot like Kelly Clarkson's My December, but with like meth and gay stuff.
Right. So some good, some bad.
Yeah, well, just mostly bad, but yes. But what a chilling song. Remember? Such a good one. Wow. If you remember to My December, Kelly Clarkson in your Spotify. So sad.
Look it up later.
Think about like a 24-year-old me like screaming in like WeHo in 2012. But what was I saying about? Oh yeah. So, but like if you're in that really, really dark space, just like in all of your trauma, you can have like, you can titrate on like, can I like accept this like 1%? Like, could I dip my toe in acceptance and like come out of it? Like, and it's never like you come to a place of self-acceptance where you're like, that was amazing. I accept myself now, and I never have to look at that again. Actually, it's on a box in my closet, my self-acceptance, and it's just there. So it's like a constant relationship, and I don't think, I just think that it's like a constant relationship, and even people when we think like, oh, I can't accept this, or like, I am so whatever, there are parts of you that can accept it. And then there are parts of you that can't. Because we have to realize, or what I've realized in my healing, I always try, whenever I hear myself, oh my God, Apple Watch. Whenever I say we have to do this, it's like, I don't want to prescribe, I want to talk about like how I think of it. But when I realized that our personality, like who we are, is like a multitude of parts. And yoga when we talk about, or in yoga or meditation when you talk about like your centered self, like observing your thoughts. In Christianity, I feel like it's Jesus. In Buddhism, it's Buddha. It's like, it's this relationship with this like higher benevolent like thing that you're supposed, but we all have that centered self. Like we all are so much more than our stories, than our families, than our identities.
Yes.
Like as humans, like we are such complex people and just such complex creatures. And then there's, you know, our ego, which I used to get offended at, but like ego is really just like the voice in your head. But that voice in your head has like so many different parts. And I learned that from Richard Schwartz, who like invented this or like created this type of therapy. It's called like internal family systems, or like IFS. And it's kind of like how your inside is this like system of parts that is kind of like created by like your like family of origin and like how you were raised, like when your psyche was like developed. It's like your attachment style. It's so like for me, like I have a part that's like a busy bee part and just like does not know how to say no. So that's been a big part of like my public journey, is like learning how to say no, learning boundaries. Like I think when Queer Eye first happened, I was like, oh my God, my 15 minutes has started, so I better
You swearing now?
I didn't mean to, sorry everyone, sorry Benevity. But it's like, sorry, I don't know if your podcast is like G rated, you'll have to like blur.
Oh, my podcast, no, my podcast is not, but Benevity is.
Sorry Benevity, I love you guys so much.
We're doing our best.
I'm never doing it again. But that system of learning about our parts and learning about internal family systems has been so helpful for me, realizing that like if there's something that I'm really upset about or really like I'm like, oh, that's not really like who I am. Like that's a part of my personality. Like that's a part of me that like learned to be fearful or learned to be whatever from these like past experiences. And that's all really important work that I've done with therapists who do that work. But I think of all of the therapies that I've done, internal family systems has been like the most helpful, because it like created such a like clear language for me to understand like why sometimes I only just wanted to people please and I just like had to say yes all the time, but then I was also like extremely resentful for saying yes. So I was like, why do I want to do stuff but then I hate people for it? And so, but that's parts. And so then it's like when that part comes up, when you're like resentful, you can be like, Queen, I understand. This is like you talking to yourself. We need to take a bath. We need to go to yoga. We need to like, you know, create some time for ourselves to like decompress. But we're gonna do that in like 6 hours because like you did agree to do this thing.
Yeah.
And I am gonna take care of you, but I just need you to like relax. And like, you know, that's like me talking to my irritated part. And see, my irritated part and my people pleaser part are polarized with each other. Like they kind of are like balancing each other. So sometimes you just like with your parts, you like, that's like what kind of like being an adult is it's like you learning to parent like all of the children in your parts.
So many children, so many.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I kind of want to go back and talk to my therapist and say, have you heard about this kind of therapy?
It's really cool. It's really, I think it's really interesting.
That's wonderful. Okay, so you've a couple times brought up false dichotomies or this or that thinking and you brought it up when we talked on Zoom a couple weeks ago too. And there is so much black and white thinking in the world, or there's only one way to be right. And we're so polarized as a society. How do we get beyond it?
I don't know.
Next question.
No, I mean, I hope that I don't know. Well, actually, no. You know what I'm gonna say? Because like that's like really fatalistic. That was my fatalistic part. No, you know what I think it is? When I think about my recovery, like I could have, like gratitude has been such an important part. And one thing that I think that we do have to realize, and I catch myself in this, I did, not to always quote my podcast, but I got to interview this like fierce expert in misinformation. And like, God, does anyone know how to do this?
Do you just want to put her on the table?
How do you do, will that make it stop buzzing? It's like every time someone
Well, it will
emails
make
me,
you
like,
stop feeling it on your wrist.
but it like makes a noise in the microphone.
Yeah, it's fine. There. It's in
I
timeout.
never want to see you again. No, I'm just kidding. I love the Apple Watch. It's like great. Okay, so, but I got to interview this really cool expert in misinformation and kind of like public information, like how your brain takes things on. And she was saying that anytime you have like an immediate and extreme reaction to an article, like you could be being exposed to some amount of misinformation, which she was like, actually like both sides do that. And I was like, that's sounding really MAGA to me. Both sides do misinformation. And she was like, yeah. And like, then she had some examples and I was like, oh, interest. And so that kind of taught me to like take a beat. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that there's really important things that we have to work on, volunteer on, show up for, etc. But if I have like an extreme reaction to reading something, that's just like a good note to be like, okay, there could be something in here that's like meant to intentionally trigger me, or like that's been some sort of context that's been left out.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Another thing is that like, I've also learned this the hard way in like public life multiple times, is that like trauma porn, hardship, those clicks are always gonna sell. So-and-so slams so-and-so, da-da-da, rips apart this person. Like that sells more than like, things are great. Kids are, so, and also when it comes back to duality, it's like, in some places, things are getting better. Like in some places, we see like, there's always those like, feel good stories like twice a year when like a gender nonconforming teenager like wins like prom, like king or queen or royalty.
Yes.
And it's like, but I love those twice a year stories. So as I hear myself say that, I'm like, I don't know. It's like, so in some ways I think things are better than they were 10, 20 years ago. But then in other places, they're worse.
Yeah.
Those are existing at the same time. And so when we speak about the polarization, I think in a lot of ways, it's always been like this. We've always been this polarized. We weren't aware of it as much because of social media and technology, like linking us together so much more.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, even from that Jen Mannion episode about female husbands.
Love that episode so
my gosh,
much.
you guys, I'll just like quickly recap it for you. So Jen Mannion wrote this book called Female Husbands, and this book is about, there was this phenom in like the long 18th century, and I've learned from historians, you guys, that when a historian says like a long century, like that's like 20 years before the century and then like 20 years after the century.
Yes.
Is it just me or is that like so interesting?
No,
Anyway.
it is.
So this like female husband kind of like viral phenomenon like started happening in the British and the American press in the late 1700s, and it went all the way up through like 1900-ish. But it would be where like a couple seemed to be cishet, and then through a series of events you find out that that the man is really a female. And so Jen Mannion says that like queer historians won't say that like they were trans, because in the 1700s and 1800s there was a completely different understanding, a different understanding of gender and sexuality than like what we have now. Like the word like gay and trans, like that wasn't pathologized until like 1900. Like it wasn't seen as like a thing. And interestingly, in the UK, the female husbands were covered much more positively. It was like, oh my gosh, how cool that this woman was able to like navigate the world as a man. Like this is preposterous. And they were like, but interesting at the same time. Whereas in the US, they were calling them sneaky, fraudulent. There was this like more sinister thing to the coverage of female husbands in the US. And in a lot of those articles where they were talking about female husbands, it honestly could have been written 2 months ago. Like, and so then we think about like when people on Fox and, conservative media says like these woke people and these, it's like this, it's so new. It's so not new. And I think like so many things, like we are just so want to be like, we are the first. Like this has never happened before.
We've always been here.
Yeah, and like these sorts of this sort of controversy and like, moral dictatorship has like been around and been trying to be imposed for as long as like colonialism. And for as long as we're concerned around here, like that's kind of what has been dictating it. So I think that we have a lot of reasons to hope.
Yes.
I also think that we have a lot of reasons to be concerned, because we see a whole group of people being completely scapegoated, targeted with legislation, and people are just pretty mum on it. Like, I feel like this anti-trans legislation that's been passed in multiple states that like felonizes gender-affirming healthcare for parents and medical caregiver or medical providers is a really like, that should make you pause.
It's violent.
And that should, I think, should be as big of a thing as the Roe v. Wade SCOTUS leak, because that's like a potential overturning thing. But we really have states now that if you imagine your kid going to school and like there's a kid in the class that a group of kids think doesn't look enough like a boy or a girl, those parents can turn that family in to be investigated for child abuse. That is so intense. And it's like people don't think about that. And also the whole time it's like trans kids are being scapegoated in the same society where we have mass shootings all over the place, and it's not trans people. And it should alarm everyone, cisgender or otherwise, that this cohort of legislators are effectively passing legislation that villainizes, targets, takes away equal protections, disincentivizes people from being able to get education, from finding work. Like we've seen this happen in societies before when people get scapegoated, and doesn't seem like people are really like supporting the people that need the help to fight this battle right now.
I feel like that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask, something I really, like what I'm most excited to ask you and have been for a couple of weeks now. A common thing that celebrities and companies are both told pretty often is stay in your lane. And that's especially true when it comes to speaking up about injustices or anything that's seen as quote unquote political. Why is it important for both celebrities and companies to speak up, to drop that kind of thinking, especially when we are talking about things like racism and misogyny and homophobia and transphobia?
Well, keeping it to myself first, it's like, I wrote and love that story, this, because I have been told, like, stay in your lane a lot. And I always think to that, like, I was someone who was living with HIV and who was battling addiction and various compulsivities for a lot longer than what I've been a celebrity. Even referring to myself as a celebrity still like makes me feel like a weird shiver up my back, like when I would be doing someone's hair.
That's okay,
and they would like
I
refer
called
to
you
them.
that.
But I would have like old clients who would be like, oh my God, like I was like a principal extra on like whatever, and like I'm like walking the carpet, like really wanted to be referred to as a celebrity. So like I always had it in my head, like don't ever refer to yourself as a celebrity because it's like the height of weirdness. But I have been like myself and someone who's dealing with, you know, being a survivor of abuse, addiction, compulsivity, living with HIV for much longer than I've been a public facing like celebrity. So, and also like HIV is an intersectional, racial, gender, inequality issue, as is being a queer person. You have to be like shoulder to shoulder and intersectionally aligned with like every other marginalized group as a queer person. Because queer people are also Black people, are also Latino people, are also Asian people, are also disabled people, are also women, are also everyone. So it's really important for me to like think about that and act on that. As far as companies go, I don't know. Because I don't know. It's like, with JV and hair, for instance, like I know that it took me a really long time to find the right partner because I was like, we're gonna speak about these things as a company and it's like not something that I'm willing to let go of. I need to have control over that. I need to have a say on that. I can't like give you my name and then like not be actively involved in that like every single day. So that took me a while to find someone that would let me do that. I also noticed that with like bigger companies that I've worked with, there's like a lot of fear. There's like, you know, when you have a country that like 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, you don't want to lose out on those coins. And when it comes to Pride, I feel like I get a whole bunch of calls, but then when it's not Pride and like year to year, month to month, it's like there's a lot of silence around the anti-trans bills. There's a lot of silence around Don't Say Gay. There's also a lot, I mean, even with Netflix, like look at who
I do.
So like, it's like, that's part of it. Like, we are in this capitalistic society. Like, you need to eat. Like, I got people that I need to pay for. Like, I have employees, I have things, people that I want to help, I have things that I'm trying to achieve. So that's like, again, the duality is like, how do you navigate that? And that's something that I'm really having to look at myself in the mirror for, like, as I continue in my career. It makes a huge difference in who I advertise for and who I don't. And I mean, I look back on my first year, second year of my career, like, you know, in Queer Eye, like 18, 19, some things in 20, where because of that whole like false dichotomy of like, oh, like my career is going to be this long, so I need to say yes to everything that comes through. There are so many things that I would not do again. And people were like, I signed on to something where there was this like great pitch deck where I was like, oh my God, they're really being allies. And then I did it. And then later on, I like realize, or do I really like start digging, and I'm like, fuck. I mean, darn it. I know I'm never getting hired again, but Devity, I'm sorry. I love you. I'm so sorry. Authenticity though, am I right? So, but it's like, we live and we learn, and that's part of what it has been. But I think as far as companies go, like, what I've noticed in companies that do tend to get it right, it takes multiple people in the highest echelons of the executive corporate ladder to be fearless.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Because I have seen it. I have seen people do the right thing. I have seen people be fearless in corporate settings. I have totally seen it. Yeah. And I've also seen people be totally spineless. And their names and numbers and addresses are, just kidding. Can you imagine? Like, goes to Benevity, get out of here.
So far, it looks like we have one question from the audience.
Oh my gosh, don't like keep me late, everybody.
I know, right? So, what is the one thing you say to yourself when you feel like you're not good enough? So, which is great, because I actually had a question around this too. Like, what do you do? Because you have a whole chapter, and love that story, about imposter syndrome. And I think of it in terms of like RuPaul and the Inner Saboteur. I tell that bitch to shut up sometimes. But like, what do you do?
Okay, honestly, not to sound conceited, but I don't feel like my inner voice ever really says like, you're not good enough. I think it used to. I do think with like there's a difference between like understanding like where you are with your self-acceptance and then understanding what your worth is. You know what I'm saying? So like, if I have like something that, sometimes it'll be like, I could have done better. I like wish I would have done better. I wish I would have done something differently, but I don't think it's like, because I think that's one like falsehood that I learned really early is like, I thought I wasn't good enough, and then that almost killed me, you know?
So I know there's a whole book about it. It's called Over the Top, go get it. It's a memoir, it's great. But like, what does that journey look like going from a person who has imposter syndrome? And so what would you say to other people that have imposter syndrome? Like, what do those first baby steps look like? Like, how do you start dealing with that?
Well, like my imposter syndrome is more around like my entertainment career, like because I became a comedian in a way that like a lot of other comedians like don't get to become a comedian, and because like I get to like do a lot of the stuff that I get to do in kind of like a seemingly unconventional way, because I've done a lot of people's hair. I've had a lot of friends that like wanted to have a career like what my career is, and I just did it in a different way, and I think there was like some guilt around that. But one thing that I think is really important is so much of it comes down to your relationship with yourself. And for that inner saboteur, or for the part that thinks that you're not good enough, or thinks like, for me, I feel like it's like my critic, like never feels like it was like as good as it could have been. Like felt like I was worthy, but felt like it could have been better, or I should have done better.
Yeah.
There's always like, that part is always trying to protect you. Like our parts are always doing the best they can with what they know. Like they're trying to protect you. So I never really try to say to that one, like, shut up and get in the back seat, you dumb nightmare. Like, I'm more of like, honey, who told you who is talking to you like that?
Yes.
Like, you did the best you could. You're gonna have another chance. Like, you know, like it's kind of like that.
Yeah, you're reminding me.
More compassionate with the part.
You're reminding me of a thing that I think it was a friend whose therapist told them, that our brains aren't here to make us happy, they're here to keep us safe.
That's that whole like reptile brain thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I like used to doom scroll on Twitter, like looking, because it's like, which I also talk about in the book, but it's like people saying to me, for instance, like, oh my God, you're such an inspiration, or like my so-and-so like does this, like that isn't gonna like tank my career. you know? But someone being like, that, nah, like that is a threat.
Yes.
Right? So if you were like out in the wilderness, like in the day, honey, like the bunny, that's not a threat. That's like a fuzzy bunny. That's the compliment.
Yeah.
The tiger or the lion is like the troll, which is why we're all, it's like our negativity bias. And like, that's why we're so wired to notice the negativity. I referred to it in my book about like Yelp, because like you could do like 15,000 amazing haircuts and perfect colors, but the one time you take someone's fringe too short, watch out.
That's right.
Like, watch out. It's like
coming for you.
Someone's way more likely to like report a bad experience than they are like the best one ever.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just kind of like human nature, and that is like survival brain. And even just knowing that, I think allows us to be a little bit more like gentle with ourselves and each other.
So we got a couple more questions that came in. Thank you, people, for submitting your questions. So someone asked, if just to follow up on what you were saying about companies and how some of them are fearless, can you give an example of a company that you see as fearless?
Amorous is one, the one who owns JVN Hair and Biossance. I think like, sometimes I just get emotional about it. I think like, I will never forget like my agent calling me to be like, Biossance wants you to be their global self-care ambassador. And I was like, like I feel my mouth slobbering right now. And then I looked at like what I was gonna get to do and like what the paycheck was, and I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. But then like my first book was coming out like 2 weeks later. And so I was like, are they gonna want an ex-meth head who has HIV to be their global self-care ambassador? So and like at that point, like my endorsements agent hadn't even like read my book yet. Like only like 3 people had. So I was like, Stephanie, girl, like you got to read this. And then Catherine, who is the president of Biossance, and she was the one who like thought to bring me in. I just like emailed her after like these like 3 long, like meetings that we had like around the partnership, and I was just like, and I like her so much. Like I just like her so much. I respect her so much. She's just like really genius. She's like a titan, like entrepreneur in like the beauty world. And I was like, I really like choke up thinking about it. I was like, look, I have a book coming out. It's gonna say this, this, and this, and I think you should read it before we like move any further. And she was like, okay. And I was like, oh my God, it's over. And then like literally the next day at like 9 a.m, she called me and she was like, this only makes me want to work with you more.
Yes. Good.
Yeah. So I feel like that is one that I know for myself, like personally, that feels really authentic and really good. And I've seen other instances of companies, doing the right thing and being fearless. But that was one that always just like sticks with me, because like they could have gone with anyone. And yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple more. As social impact pros, we often partner with organizations and charities around Pride. So what advice would you give to people who are trying to actually create authentic partnerships?
So I'm really into mutual aid. Love mutual aid. And there are so many mutual aid organizations that are on the ground right now that are just like doing such important work. And I think that especially in the LGBTQIA plus community, but especially the trans community, we need people in harm's way getting access to the funds and the resources, like not after like a director and like a founder and like a bunch of other people have like, and obviously when you're doing charity work, like people got to eat too, like the people doing the work got to eat too, and that's like an important thing. But if we can invest in infrastructure that is like really getting money and resources, food, education, access to medication, whatever it is that a trans person may need, healthcare, faster, I think that mutual aid is really good in that. So I also think that there's organizations like Trans Education Network Texas that are doing really important, great work. And there's also like the duality of places that do mutual aid and other things. So looking to see if there's like, when you're partnering with someone, if there's a way that you can be more like intentional with really making sure that you know where that money is going and that it's going to affect the people that are on the front lines, that are being like, that don't have a home, that have been disowned by their family. Maybe they're experiencing homelessness. Maybe they have HIV and they need access to like rides to get their medication, or they need access to internet. There is so much that trans people need and just get left out for. So yeah, like getting just, yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
One other question from the audience. What would you tell your younger self that was scared of being authentic?
Well, whenever someone asks me what would I say to my younger self, my first answer is always, don't do meth.
It's just good life advice.
It's really good life
Any
advice.
age.
It's like so
Anytime.
good.
It's a
It's like,
classic.
you know, it's like weed.
Oh,
Like you can be free, but like when it comes to like hardcore drugs, then you just don't do that. And on that same note, I would say, you're gonna be really scared of, it's not the authenticity that scares you, it's the conformity that scares you. Because you don't know how to conform into this world because this isn't who you are.
yeah.
And that's gonna be really scary, and you're gonna wanna tap out, you're gonna wanna numb out, you're gonna wanna do drugs, you're gonna wanna like do anything else than show yourself to the world. And then what I would also say is that like it is so much less hard than what you think it's gonna be. It seems like the biggest mountain that you never could climb, but actually it's like, it's kind of like when you thought you could never do a round up back handspring, but then you learned how to do one. It's like that. That's what I would say to my younger self. And then like definitely don't do drugs.
No, I'm kidding.
No,
No.
I can't. I mean, I could, but like you guys did not pay me enough for that.
No. No, I agree.
'Cause that would be like a free like coochie show, and because I'm not wearing Spanx.
It's a good point.
I'm wearing underwear, everyone, don't freak out, but just like not Spanx, so it's just like too much. My ankles and this, no. I also, you know, when I do my gymnastics routine, like on stage, like I have like a little like tumble track.
Right.
On account of my 35-year-old joints.
So we should come to your comedy show is what you're
My
saying.
new show is so much fun, you guys. It's so much fun. And my new show is so funny. There's a part where I suffocate Vladimir Putin in my fupa. It's one of my strongest jokes, and I also do it by seducing him in a manner of Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies. And I'm in my rainbow leotard that if you've ever seen me on my Instagram, like in that rainbow leotard on my tour, like I do the joke in that leotard. It's like one of my most life-affirming, like 5-minute jokes ever. It's really fun for me.
I haven't even heard it yet, and you're already giving me life.
Yeah. And then it goes into this whole like the duality of like my unspeakable, inexplicable attraction to Mitt Romney, and how there's like so much to unpack there. And how like speaking of parts, because you know what it was for me, honey? It was the 2002 Salt Lake Games. It wasn't like all of it. I think it was like the opening ceremonies or something. Mitt, honey, he had that scruff, honey. He doesn't do that very much.
Right.
But that scruffy 2002 Mitt Romney, honey.
It was a moment.
Ooh, my little like 16-year-old self. I also think it was like the trauma because like, you know, Michelle Kwan got bronze like 7 days later. And so like I was just like needing a savior, like needing someone to like rescue me.
Yeah.
And since then, it turns out like I love silver medals and bronzes, and I also like I've learned to love Sarah Hughes. Like she's amazing, and she totally deserved it. And it turns out like Michelle's like fine with her 2 Olympic medals. Like didn't have to be gold. Like she's totally like fine, so I'm fine.
Yes.
But can you believe
Right.
that I get to be friends with Michelle Kwan?
Okay.
Can you believe
Okay,
that
so
I'm
here's
literally
the
going
thing.
to dinner with her tonight?
Are you really?
Yeah. And I get to see her tomorrow. Like that's what my life is like. Like,
Well, I feel like that might blow my closing question.
sorry.
No, you know what? I'm going to ask it anyway, and then
It's
maybe
like it's
pick
hard to
something
go
else.
up from there.
So here's the thing. Last week on Instagram, yes, I follow you on Instagram. I'm sure half the room does as well. Not a surprise, given that I've just fangirled on you for 55 minutes. But last week on Instagram, you shared a post and you asked everyone how we're bringing joy into the world. You were doing some gymnastics. It was very cute. And you said that even when things are horrific, we're still allowed joy because it invites healing. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, how are you experiencing joy today?
Oh my God, what a good question. Well, I do get, like I said, like I get to go to dinner with Michelle Kwan, which is like
I love
don't know,
this
like,
for you.
I mean,
I love
think
your
of- like,
life.
that's actually what I would probably say to my younger self. Like, I feel like you would pass the fuck. Ugh. Would pass out. You know, just pass out. And you know what I need? Before I do public speaking, I need to it's like, is this like grandma rules or like none? Because like I'm really good at not cussing if I imagine that I'm talking to my grandma, because she would have like punched me in the face.
You don't know how hard I've been holding back. Like that's my
You're
default
not gonna get in trouble. You did great.
Baby, you're the best.
It's so
Thank you.
good.
Thank you. Thank
You
you.
did so good. So good.
Yes, that's it.
You just like,
Thank you. That's amazing. How often do you
Wait,
get to
so
have
do
your
you live
personal
in-
hero tell you this? That's not bad.
wait, do you live in Canada or do you live where do you live?
I live in Canada. I live in
right?
Calgary, Canada. I live where the cowboys roam.
See, I feel like all in all, it feels like y'all are doing like significantly better than we are doing.
Well, it's not bad.
But I was like, I feel like you're giving me like what do you get like a congressperson?
Sorry, what?
Like you're giving me like congressperson.
Wow.
Like, or do you guys call that like an MP?
We might.
What is that?
Well, I don't know what a congressperson is, so I don't
Person in
know.
Congress, you know, it's like AOC. She's a
Oh.
you know.
Yeah, it's probably an MLA or an MP. So
Yeah, one of my
friends
could
is
see you
so
just like in
mad
this
at
like
me
gorgeous
right
like political room with like these people and you being like, I object to that.
now. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Speaker of the House.
Do we
I
have
just want
one of those
everyone
in
to run for
Canada?
political. Everyone who I like, I just want them to run for political office.
Yeah, okay. Just for you.
No, like for the public.
No, I mean, I'll do it just for you.
Oh, for the public, honey, they need you. You'd be so good.
All right, well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
for taking the time to share with us.
Hey everyone, me again. That is all for this very special episode of Queerly Recommended. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll get notified whenever we release an episode, or if you have a friend that you think would like it, or even just like this special episode, please tell them all about it and send them the link. And like I said at the beginning, if you enjoyed it, please make a donation to the Transgender Education Network of Texas so they can keep doing the crucial work that they're doing. If you want to connect with us on your favorite social media sites, just search for Queerly Recommended on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or email Chris or I at podcast@queerlyrecommended.com. Goodbye, everyone.